The Center for Disease Control's pandemic response included politicizing science, disregarding civil liberties, and advocating for school closures, all of which eroded public trust in the federal agency. Now, in an apparent attempt to erode whatever public trust may remain, the CDC's official website recently published advice to help men who claim to be transgender chest feed babies. Instead of focusing on a mother's nourishment of her baby, this chest feeding advice includes pointers for men on how to take a drug cocktail to produce hormones that mimic a pregnant woman's bodies, all while apparently ignoring potential harm such lab-grown hormones would have on a delicate infant. What fresh madness is this? Joining me now to discuss it is Mary Szoch. She's the director of the Center for Human Dignity at Family Research Council. Mary, good to see you today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Joseph.
Now, Mary, more importantly for these purposes, in addition to being the director of our Center for Human Dignity, you're also a mother. What was your reaction when you first heard this story?
I think it's horrifying. One of the things about being a mom is that being a mom is centered on others. The womb is actually the only place in the body, the woman's uterus is the only organ that is actually created to house another. And so motherhood itself is other focused, and chest feeding is self-centered, self-focused. It's a perversion of a beautiful act that is intended to nourish a child.
Now, significantly, I think, this guidance is lacking any kind of analysis about the impact that this might have on a child. Now, in recent years, we've followed a lot of state legislation, things like the SAFE Act, that would prohibit state legislation in which they would prohibit doctors from giving puberty blockers to 12-year-olds or from removing the genitalia of children. And the response to that is always, oh, it's for the best interest of the children. They need these things. In this case, they're not even attempting to make an argument that it's in the best interest of the child. What do we learn from that?
No, they certainly aren't. It is 100% focused on the man who is masquerading as a woman and who has this perverted desire to feed a child, or to pretend to feed a child. We know that breastfeeding is focused on the baby. That's why moms do it. It is and can be a really beautiful thing, but breastfeeding can also be painful and challenging and difficult. The challenge of having your child there and needing to feed him or her while that child is screaming, it's not an easy task, but you do it because you love your child. And that's the same reason why friends of mine who have been unable to breastfeed because of a previous history of breast cancer or because their child had a tongue tie, that's why those mothers choose instead to use formula, because their focus is the child, not their own gratification. What this is about is self-gratification.
Yeah. Now, Mary, I'm pretty confident there's no science on this. This horror was thought of as apparently like yesterday in historical terms. So we haven't had any experience with this. But hypothetically, what harm could come to children if this became something that people actually tried to do?
Well, we know the benefits of breastfeeding, of a mother breastfeeding her child. We know that breast milk changes itself so that it can act as an additional immune system, so to speak. It actually helps protect the child from infection and from diseases. We know that that's certainly not happening with this drug-induced secretion that is very much not breast milk. Furthermore, we know that what is being produced has the potential to cause heart problems for this child. But the real outrage here is that this is a man who is masquerading as a woman, who is exploiting a newborn baby, the most innocent among us, for his own purposes. And we know when that newborn child comes out of the womb, there is a natural instinct for that child to root around, to peck, to look anywhere for food. And it's up to us to be the adults who say, we will protect that child's life, and we will ensure that that child receives actual nourishment.
And Mary, you referred to heart problems there, and I want to drill down into that for a moment to help our audience here understand what's happening. I'm going to hope I'm going to pronounce this correctly. Domperidone is one of the drugs that's recommended by the CDC as part of this drug cocktail. And what we apparently know is that that hormone can get into breast milk, which means you would then be giving it to an infant. And apparently, that drug has been connected to irregular heartbeats, other heart challenges. Is this really just an experiment on infants that we've decided to let happen because apparently it's politically correct?
It absolutely is. And we're putting a brand new baby, a child who has no defenses at all, who can't speak for himself. We're putting that child's life at risk. We're putting that child at risk of having heart palpitations and various difficulties so that we can encourage this woke culture. And this again is just the very opposite of what breastfeeding is meant to do. Even the World Health Organization encourages breastfeeding because of its benefits for the child. This removes the focus from the child and places it squarely on the man, which is the total opposite of what motherhood does, which is a complete giving of self.
We are seeing more and more examples of this, and I think it's clear evidence that the sexual revolution is really adult focused and it's not child focused. Other examples of this is essentially human trafficking that takes place when women's bodies are rented commercially and we call them surrogates. And then the child is removed at birth from the only human it's ever had any connection to, and in many cases given to people who have no biological connection to it. And the child is essentially an accessory in life because it gives fulfillment to the adults, irrespective of what impact that has on the children. Mary, where does this end?
Well, I think this is the consequence of a country that looks at children as property. And as you said, we've seen this in the buying and selling of children in human trafficking. We've seen this in the treating of a child as a piece of property when that child's life is destroyed through the horrors of abortion, when that child is purchased through surrogacy,